Thank you for joining us here today. So we've heard a lot at Web Summit already about self-driving cars, about electric cars. We just heard a lot of interesting stuff about charging. But we haven't heard a lot yet about the more basic question of how we will actually buy a car in the future. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the basic model that Volvo is trying to disrupt here?
Sure. Let me introduce this idea of Care by Volvo, which is the name we've given to a subscription service that makes it easy and I think radically changes how you get your access to a car. So I think we can all relate to the idea of a subscription for something. You might subscribe to Netflix or Spotify, might subscribe to Amazon Prime, for example, to get goods to our homes. So we asked the question, why not the same for cars? And in terms of why this might make sense, let's think about it this way. You know, cars are a very powerful capability and device in people's lives. So if you think about a device that you have to decide to get your hands on today, you might think that in 2 years there'll be new hardware and new software, for example, and you might want to stay current with that device as the product continues to evolve. And then you ask yourself, well, what's the easiest way for someone to decide how to always have a device in their life as personalized as a car in a very simple way? And that's where we came up with the idea of a subscription. It's a way to always ensure that you have the latest and greatest ride and vehicle in your life in a way where you don't have to decide very big decisions so frequently.
So can you talk me a little bit through how that actually works in practice? So let's just say I pay a certain amount of money every month for this car that I'm subscribing to. Can I then switch out that car if I don't like it for a different model within the same price range, and it will just show up at my door the next day?
Yeah, so there's a few table stakes items to this idea of a subscription. The first is a very high degree of transparency around what you pay. So it's a national price, which by the way is a big concept, because typically if whatever car you like, you might go to one retailer or dealership and then figure out if you can get a better price at another one. You really have to do a lot of work to figure out if it's a fair price. In the case of a national price, it's there, it's transparent, it's published, so there's no negotiation necessary. There's also nothing that you give up front. You simply select the amount of time you want to commit to. Could be, for example, 2 years, and then you're just paying your monthly amount. Now, what happens at the end of 2 years, if you like what you have and you simply want the new one, you continue the subscription, and we'll take the one you have away, and we'll replace it with the brand new one.
So is the difference between this model and, say, a leasing model, essentially, that this interchangeability of the car that I drive?
Yeah, I think this tries to replace the lease. So without offending any device companies, I'm just picking some names. This is iPhone as it relates to BlackBerry. You know, one replaces the other. It's just the next generation. With the iPhone, you could have questioned in 2008, well, it doesn't have a keyboard. Am I going to type on my screen? Is that really going to work? Well, think about a subscription as something where you're not thinking up front about down payment, how you exit out of the car you have, the residual value when the lease expires. All of that decision making is taken away. It's a much smaller decision. Do you want to commit to a car for, let's say, 2 years or 1 year, have a monthly fee that's very clear, includes everything you need for it, and then at the end of that period, if it's working, keep going with the actual one you have. It might be a lower cost, or just get the new one and continue paying what you were already accustomed to paying.
So I believe you've rolled this out, or you're testing this in a few markets at the moment. Can you tell us what you've learned already from your early experience?
Yeah, so we have this available in 7 markets. So I'll talk about one of our first markets and our most current release. So we started in the United States, and what we thought would be a good idea is to really introduce this new way of getting your hands on a car with a brand new car that we introduced. It's called the XC40. It's a smaller SUV. It's very slick, and it's sort of targeted towards the millennial demographic. And the results were, well, first of all, 90% of the people who participated in the subscription, they were new to Volvo. So we call them conquest customers because they were conquested from some other brand. So that's good. Second, they skewed younger, 10 years younger than our actual Volvo customer. And thirdly, half of them actually got the car through mobile without ever showing up to test drive it at a retailer. So essentially sight unseen. They whipped out their phone, tap, 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 and they were done. So that was the US, and we did that about a year ago. Most recently, 2 weeks ago, we announced in Germany, and we're looking at different markets so we could get different learnings. In Germany, we elected to put all of the Volvos we make, and we have a full line through the subscription service. So you can go to the German app or website, you can look at any Volvo, and if you want to purchase it, that's one option, but if you want to subscribe, you can do that as well for any Volvo we make.
So you got the US, you've got Germany. Which other? They're the two most significant markets?
Those are two areas where we're doing a ton of learning, but it's available in Spain, in France, in Norway, in UK as well.
So it sounds like from what you're saying that you're essentially banking on a massive sort of cultural shift in terms of how people buy. I mean, I think we were talking about this earlier, Netflix and Spotify just have probably really helped you a lot in terms of changing the culture of how people think about owning things. And as you're talking, it sort of strikes me that the real business, if this takes off, the real business that has something to worry about here is the leasing market, the car dealership market.
Yeah, I think that's one aspect. In general, I think the other thing this unlocks is being a direct-to-consumer company. So if I could touch on that a bit here, is if you think about it, I would ask the question, is Volvo a consumer company? And hopefully many of you will raise your hand and say, yeah, I've seen the logo before. Of course it's a consumer company. So it's a consumer brand, but is it really interacting directly with the customer? And the answer is probably historically no. It's more of a wholesale company. We manufacture the cars, we take orders from, let's say, retailers, and then we recognize some revenue, and then they might sit on some parking lots, and then they're sold to consumers. Well, now we're talking about a way in which to work backward from the consumer, and the consumer is basically taking out the phone and saying, this is the model I want, and then we're trying to make more of the ones that the customer wants, and link that directly to our manufacturing environment, so we're producing more of the ones people want, and getting them to them as quickly as possible. The retailers still have a role in that. It's a little bit different, but the difference is now when you're interacting with customers, you learn a lot more. You learn which ones do they want more of, so you can tune your manufacturing. You can learn sort of, well, a renewal is coming up. So let's say, here's something interesting. 3 months before, if you let us know that you want a different one, and we can get started making it, then you don't have to wait for the new one. And by the way, since you're not going to be using the one that you currently have, maybe we can find someone else for that. Why is this interesting for the world? Well, it reduces waste, because now we have a little bit of a matching problem. We don't have to have cars sitting in docks or parking lots. You can be much more efficient with this system, pass on some of that value to people. And because, I mean, one of the criticisms of the legacy car business compared with, say, the big Silicon Valley companies is that you guys have you don't know as much about your consumers as, say, Google does, for example, or maybe even Tesla does increasingly. Do you think is this too little too late in terms of, you talk about the car companies building a direct relationship with consumers. I mean, how much of a mountain do you and other companies have to climb here? I think we're just starting. So I'd like to believe that in the future, let's say you subscribe, your 2 years is almost done or your year is almost done. Now you say, I want a different model, and that's fine. Why can't you just get the new one and everything you did with the previous one is just there automatically? Almost like a session with a laptop or with a computer. You pick up where you left off. Think about the personalization, your climate settings, your seat settings, your apps, what actions, what behaviors, when the voice activation learns it's you and the way you interact and command the car to do things. All of that can just be transferred because it's cloud-based and it just moves over. So that works for subscription. It also works for sharing because let's say you subscribe, but now you're in Lisbon and now you're going to be using a car that's not yours, but it happens to be a Volvo. Well, those personalized settings should just move over for those 2 days where you're enjoying the Web Summit. All of that is possible, but it's not really out there by anyone. And now we have to go make it happen.
And do you think Tesla, in a way, has made your job easier for you? In the same way, perhaps, that Netflix has sort of, and Spotify have changed how people think about owning things and buying things. What Tesla is doing now, which in a lot of ways it's pioneered the direct-to-consumer experience. You know, I was listening to a podcast with Elon Musk the other day where he said he had his advertising people driving Model 3s to the front door of his clients on delivery day last month. Have they made your job easier here as well as you try to roll out this new idea?
Yeah, I think, look, let's not kid ourselves. We're in an industry that's almost 100 years old, right? So there's a lot of incumbent behaviors, and Tesla set the tempo that there's some new rules. Now, I look at Volvo as the best positioned incumbent to say, okay, we're just at the start of this journey of really being much more of a software-driven consumer company. And so when we look at this idea of the personalization in the car, no one has nailed that. So that's an opportunity for us to go and make that a core part of our in-car experience. And as a result, I think, you know, a lot of the incumbents, including Volvo, we're very focused on becoming much more of a software-driven company where you're seeing what the customer is actually doing with the product and you're evolving it. Our vision for the car is that every day the experience is a little bit better.
So one of the big question marks hanging over the, whatever you want to call it, the traditional car business, the legacy car business, is how nimble they can stay in the face of Waymo, Tesla, etc. And you know, if anyone in business school will tell you, disrupting yourself from inside is one of the hardest things that any big company with a big bureaucracy and a big tradition can do. You're in a very sort of privileged, interesting position where you're sort of trying to disrupt Volvo and how Volvo does business from within. Can you share with us some of the insights that you've learned from that? Have you sort of been, you know, how challenging is it to change the way a legacy car company thinks about how it does business?
Sure. Let me start with a story, which is when I arrived at Volvo, and I come with a Silicon Valley background. I had previously worked at Amazon, and they said, can you come in and present to the board of directors? And I said, sure. What do we want to talk about? Strategy, the future of cars? They said, no. Tell us what good software development is. And I said, wow, that's really a good sign. The board of directors of this massive company wants to understand how you do good software. And so I brought in some of the lessons of how Amazon does it. And the reason why that's important is because it's very different than when you think about making a physical product where you're deciding some things today and it actually doesn't get out there for 5 years. The rules of software about being able to learn something today and do something different tomorrow or next week or next month. And so we won't geek out here. We don't have the time to geek out about agile software development or anything like that. But we made a massive number of changes inside our company to be much more able and nimble to learn and understand what people are actually doing with the products. When they get into the car, which apps are they using? What actions are they you know, most frequently taking advantage of? When they open up the phone and look at the Volvo app, how should that work with the car, et cetera, et cetera. And look, we don't really know what are the sort of like the killer behaviors we need to support 2 or 3 years from now. But what we do know is we don't want the bottleneck to be our internal technology. We have to be ready to move at the pace of the consumer. So we've made some big changes on how we build the product inside Volvo cars.
So we've talked a little bit about how the future of car buying might change. I was reading this morning that Volvo has also taken a stake in the electric charging startup FreeWire. Can you tell us a little bit more about what other things Volvo is looking at? I think you have a fund that's specifically tasked with looking at auto tech. Can you tell us what other things are you looking at? What can we expect to come down the track?
Yeah, I think it's two things. It's the spaces we're looking at, and I can talk a bit about that. And then it's how we're going about exploiting or advancing those opportunities. So one thing we've done is establish a tech fund. We have a fund that's very significant size where we can put money into, let's say, young companies with interesting technology. And we did announce something recently in a company called FreeWire, and they make mobile charging more possible. So imagine being able to plug in a mobile charging unit in the same outlet where you plug in a dryer. It doesn't require installation, permitting, construction. So it really expands the notion of where charging can happen. So we think that's interesting, and we invested in it, and hopefully that will accelerate our electrification ambition, which is big.
Yeah.
We want half the cars we sell or that people subscribe to by the middle of the next decade to be fully electric. So now we have to think about the infrastructure, of course. But so the fund is one way we do that.
How much is in that fund? Can you disclose
We're
that?
not saying it publicly, but it's more than tens of millions of dollars. It's enough to, play pretty seriously in a large number, in a good portfolio of startups. But alongside of that, we are really interested in co-creating with large tech companies. So we've forged relationships with Google, with Amazon, Uber, and Baidu, just to name a few. And the way we do that is one, we're very open to partnering, and second, we have a presence in key areas. So we have a Silicon Valley presence that's really in proximity to some of the bigger players. And we're ready to think about things at an early stage and prototype together and come up with something and be one of the first companies to put it out there with our partner.
Okay, well, with that, I think we're out of time. Thank you very much for being with me today.
Yeah, thanks for making time. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.